Okay. All right. Well, now I will just introduce our guests for this program. So first of all, we are so lucky to have with us Elena Terry. She is the founder and executive chef of the community outreach nonprofit WildBearies, which strives to bring ancestral foods to communities in a nurturing and nourishing way with the goals of building stronger tribal communities through food. She's involved with many different local food and cultural resiliency organizations, which I'm sure she'll be able to tell us more about today. And she's going to be presenting a traditional soup for us, which will be something lovely to try cooking at home in this wintertime season.
I'm doing a Zoom meeting for Sally.
And then also, we are welcoming Dr. Lucy Long. Dr. Long is the founder and director of the Center for Food and Culture, based out of Bowling Green. Is that right, Lucy?
Yes.
And she's presenting on her ongoing project, Comfort Foodways, which invites people to consider how comfort and discomfort manifest in our ways of acquiring, making, and sharing food. So she's going to be leading our discussion today and giving us some interesting scholarly perspective on this culture work. And we thought that maybe Lucy could start out our talk today with something about to center our to center the event today, and some things to think about with Comfort Foodways. Lucy, would you like to say something?
Yes. I'm also trying to keep my cat from knocking things down. So if I suddenly leap away, that's what's happening. Comfort food is one of those things that it seems very self-evident, it's food that comforts. However, the concept was actually developed in the US. In 1966, the psychologist Dr. Joyce Brothers was the first one to actually use the phrase, and she used it in an article explaining the obesity epidemic in the US. And she was saying, people are eating too much comfort food, people are stressed, and they're then eating these foods that are unhealthy for them. So this is a very American kind of idea. Okay, and then in the 1980s, some food writers started using it to talk about Southern cuisine. I'm Southern. This is food that's comforting, but it also was food that's fattening, and everyone was, would say there's all this, it's very high fat, high sugar, high salt, so it's unhealthy. However, if you're stressed, it's good for your emotions, so you have an excuse to eat it. Okay, now this is coming out of a very particular cultural background in which we tend to actually assign morality to food. Think about how we say things like, "Oh, I was so bad yesterday, I ate ice cream," or "I've been so good, I'm going to reward myself with this bad food, so I'm going to have a cookie," we're not even conscious, that we're assigning this morality to foods. Okay, but the whole idea of comfort food is that if we're stressed, we have an excuse to eat this other food, that we know really isn't as healthy for us as it could be, and as food that can, contribute very negatively to our weight, to our body image, to our sleep or whatever. So this is a very American concept, that there are good and bad foods. Okay, so when we say comfort food, it's not simply, oh, it's food that comforts. This is food that we have to have an excuse, a justification to be able to eat this food and not feel like we are, lazy people who have no self-control and no self-discipline. Okay, so that's the cultural background on comfort food. Okay, now when the pandemic started, I was like everyone else, I was very aware of all these different anxieties, not just around food, but anxieties about life in general. So I started noticing people on social media were talking about, well, I'm feeling so stressed, I'm baking these cakes, I'm baking bread. Okay, and then food media started picking up on that and said, oh, here's some recipes, some comfort food recipes to help get you through this difficult time. Okay, so so people were responding to the pandemic with food, trying to use food in different ways to comfort themselves. I was very aware of the idea of comfort food, partly because I had co-edited this volume with folklorist Michael Owen Jones. So I was thinking about comfort food anyway. And then, when I started seeing it on social media and the New York Times and other newspapers and food magazines were all starting to publish comfort food recipes. So I was very aware of it. One of the things, well, there were several things that I noticed. Comfort food in the US has also become a marketing category, and it's used usually for Southern cuisine, Jewish cuisine, African American cuisine. Okay, and it's kind of demeaning in a way. It's like saying, well, these whole cuisines are not really healthy for us, but they'll give you comfort. If you're a weak enough person to need to be comforted by food, here, you can go eat, this Southern biscuits and gravy, whatever. Okay, so if you think about it, that's kind of demeaning. However, every single one of us has our own history with food and our relationship with food. So the foods that we're going to find comforting are going to be different for every single one of us. Okay, so so there's that food industry category, which I don't respond to. Meatloaf and mashed potatoes doesn't really have a place in my personal history. I don't find it comforting. So part of what we need to look at is how each one of us does have our own very specific comfort foods. Okay, now the other thing that I think is interesting, there were some medical sociologists and psychologists and nutritionists who started studying comfort food. And this was actually fairly recently. It wasn't like 2002, 2004 that they started publishing. What they started finding was that the way that food comforts is by fulfilling several needs. Our needs for nostalgia, indulgence, convenience, physical comfort, okay, and then later on someone added belonging. Okay, now all of these they relieve stress temporarily. They're kind of superficial, except the belonging, okay? And what we were seeing with the pandemic, this wasn't just regular stress. These were anxieties, about anxieties that were almost more of an existential nature. None of us knew what was going to happen in the future. There was a lot of job insecurity, but there was a lot of insecurity about just life in general, relationships. This was not just temporary stress, that eating a cupcake was going to then resolve for us. So what I started seeing was that food was being used to address these much deeper kinds of anxieties. Okay. Also, all the emphasis on social media and food publications were on comfort food. However, the reality for many of us was food was discomforting. Going shopping for ingredients, that was a scary thing to do. And if we happened to be living in a place where we had a very small refrigerator and not very much storage space, then there was a lot of discomfort in knowing whether or not we were going to have ingredients for things or even food after a week or two. So there were all these discomforts that were also built into food. And just talking about comfort food didn't really acknowledge the discomforts. Okay. Plus, food is more than just what we eat. Food is all the activities, all the events, okay, all the places and spaces that surround eating and food. So folklorists use the term foodways to refer to all those practices. So what we started doing through my center, we did a virtual ethnography. I have 5 graduate students who, and they were actually scattered all over the country in different programs. They started interviewing people, and we started going through all the different practices connected to foodways. And we talked about what discomforts do you see? You know, is it scary going shopping? What are some of the things you're doing? Okay, and what we started finding was that people were being very creative and finding ways to find comfort through food in ways that don't really fit into the idea of comfort food itself. You know, so the idea of going to the grocery store, purchasing something for your elderly next door neighbor, you know, you're giving them comfort. You're also giving yourself comfort, knowing that you can actually do something to help other people. Okay, so we did this ethnography that led to an online exhibit, and everyone is welcome to go and look at that exhibit. It's on the Center for Food and Culture. The website is www.foodandculture.org. And please feel free to respond to that. You know, part of what we're seeing, people have all these ideas, these strategies for dealing with the things that are going on during the pandemic. And it left me with a lot of hope. People want to help other people.
and I think that leads nicely with what I've seen and what I've heard Elena talking about with food in the Native American community and the Ho-Chunk community being a source of resilience. And we had this conversation, Elena, Lucy, and I, about the difference between comfort food or comfort and resilience. And I think that's a big part of what Elena does with her work. So perhaps here we can transition into Elena talking about Ho-Chunk food traditions and about the soup that she's going to make today. Welcome, Elena.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I wanted to make sure that I was off of mute. So good evening. That was a wonderful description, Lucia, and it kind of was wrapping up some of the things that we had talked about that kind of spurred the decision to make this soup tonight. And I'm going to make it and just kind of put it on behind me and continue the conversation as we're going, because soup is soup, and it's more about what you put into it than, you know, knife cuts or anything like that. So I'll be working here. Plus my normal camera person, my daughter, is doing finals right now, so I lost my extra set of hands. So bear with me, and we'll make this happen. But yes, my name is Chef Elena Terry. I am a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, and I live in Wisconsin Dells. And I love the conversation that we were having about comfort foods. As Sally-Anna mentioned before, I am the Food and Culinary Program Coordinator for the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. I also work in partnerships with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the American Indian Foods Program, the University of Wisconsin-Madison Horticulture Department. I work with several community and tribal gardens and farms, and just really like to connect people through our indigenous foods. And I know that Lucy was kind of mentioning earlier that there's a lot of different divisions that happen when you say comfort food, or what everybody's individual idea is when they hear those words. And for me, it's all about that connection to my culture, to my space and my community and what's comforting. And it was kind of funny because we had this conversation last week, and that same night my kids had asked me, you know, can we have that smoked turkey soup? And this is what we would consider, like, this is our comfort food. This is what we have as a go-to, and it has all of our favorite components into it. And I know some of these aren't as easily accessible to everybody, so there are substitutions that can be made, and I'm going to show you a couple different ways that I like to infuse flavor. So as we go along, I'll just kind of explain what I'm doing and work and talk. And if you have questions, I think Saliana will be able to kind of relay them to me, because I don't get to always see what comes up on the chat. So I have a local butcher, and there's several farms in Wisconsin where you can buy turkey legs for, like, I don't know, $30 for 40 pounds. There's a lot of people that sell them at decent rates, and my butcher smokes them for me. So I'm going to start with this smoked turkey leg, and it's so absolutely delicious. I love it because, I mean, it's still turkey, but it has this strange kind of hammy flavor because it's smoked. And you don't have to add any extra salt unless, you know, you like high salt foods, but just having this with that extra smoke and the flavor gives it the saltiness, and leaving it on the bone will give that broth a nice rich flavor also. So I just kind of score it, because I know if you've seen a turkey leg, they're very, you know, tendony, and sometimes just cutting it a little bit, so it's falling apart here. But that's what I do, and I just put it in my pot with, I'm going to use 2 quarts of water here, and let it stew for a while, and then I'll add some of the other ingredients.
Oh, Elena, we had a question. Is there any way you can tilt your camera so folks can see your cutting board?
I can once in a while, but I'm gonna have to cut. And so you can see what I'll show you what I have laid out here. Give me just a second. And like I mentioned, my assistant is taking her finals this evening, so I'm on my own tonight. But I will definitely show you.
Sounds good.
This here is my setup. So I have carrots, because my family absolutely loves carrots, a couple stalks of celery. I have some wild rice soaking here, a butternut squash, a tiny little guy, but it's perfect because we don't want it overwhelming, a zucchini, a yellow squash, an ear. And I'm going to cut all of those up and add them to the soup. One of the things, if you have dried corn, which is part of the reason why this soup is so comforting and so connecting and nourishing, is because we're able to use some of these dried ingredients like the wild rice and the sweet corn. What I have here is actually Haudenosaunee black sweet corn that my good friend Tanya Brandt gave me one ear of it 2-3 years ago. And since then we've been multiplying it out, and now I have enough for a jar that I can actually eat at home with my family, and it's like the best. So we dry that, we partially boil it when it's still in the milk stage, and then take each kernel individually off of the cob and dry it in the sun. And so I've soaked that corn, and I've had it on kind of a low simmer, and this is what it turns out to be like. It's different from hominy because when you parboil it in that milky stage, it softens the hull for you, and you don't have to completely nixtamalize your corn, which is when you turn it into hominy. And this is delicious because it has this wonderful pop to it. When you bite into it, it kind of like pops out this flavor. So that's the way we like to have our soup corn, when we are able to process it that way. And sometimes processing it depends on what the harvest is like, because I might need more seed, or I might not know if I'll need the seed for next year, so I might want to keep that and turn it into hominy. And this is kind of a luxury corn where I know that I have enough to parboil it and to make it and preserve it this way so that we know that this will be consumed and I won't need to save the seeds in case I need extra seeds for a year. So it's kind of neat. It took us 3 years to get to a point where we can process that corn this way and have it during the winter. But having that corn during the winter is so incredibly nourishing. It's just, every time we cook it, I remember that it was my best friend that gave me this one ear, and she brought it from Canada down to Taos, New Mexico, where I saw her, and she gave it to me. And it was wrapped in this like beautiful cloth. And she said, we had 1 year that I could bring to you. And since then, we've been able to grow that for our community. So for me, when you say comfort, that's the epitome of it. It's the comfort, that connection, knowing that these flavors are something that were shared for multiple generations through different tribes. And now those relationships are still being built on these incredible foods. So I absolutely love adding that in there. But I also like sweet corn, and sweet corn, like this guy, I'm just going to cut this off the cob and throw the cob in with my smoked turkey leg, because that cob holds so much flavor. I think that people like the corn so much that they forget how much flavor the cob has in it. And just adding that to your stock can really enhance, you know, the flavor development. So I like to do that, and I'll just go ahead and cut this off, and I'll add the kernels in with the soup too. It just gives it a little bit nice, more of that flavor pop that I was talking about.
Elena,
one of the, yes, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask about, I know there's so many different kinds of corn, and I went to try to get the ingredients for the soup today, and I went to the Mexican grocery near my house that sells dried corn in bulk, and the ones I got there, it's like big, like hominy kind of sized grains, so you know, different than like the small little yellow grains that we think of. And I know there's also like blue corn as a big part of like native cooking. Yeah, and I just wondered if you had anything else to say about like different kinds of corn, and you know, what you like, and maybe what's traditional to native people from this region.
There's so many different varieties of corn and ancestral corns that have been passed down. I can speak for Ho-Chunks to say that we have a red, a blue, and a white corn that are traditional, but we also have other varieties that have kind of come and become traditional and ancestral and shared. And so there are, I know in Peru, you have that choclo corn, which is the gigantic kernels, and it's so delicious, and they make like drinks out of that incredible purple corn. I think it should definitely be noted that they're so different, not only in size and texture, but in flavor and in nutrition. And a lot of the decorative corn that you see has so much more nutrition than the sweet corn, which doesn't really have a lot more than empty calories to it. And when you use that corn, you know, I like to think of it, and it goes back to the whole comfort thing. Those corn seeds have traveled with our people in however many varieties and however many tribes that still continue to have their corn. Those seeds have nourished over centuries, and they have sustained, and they have endured along with our people. They are a being as well that gives life. And having those ingredients in your house and your diet, even just around you, those seeds, or growing them, they comfort, they nourish, and they replenish you differently. And it's been incredible. And it's the mindfulness and the consideration and the teachings of our ancestors that have gotten us here that have allowed us to continue to have these foods. And the connection, the way you feel when you eat them, it's indescribable. And if it is corn that you can get from the Mexican restaurant, then have the corn from the Mexican restaurant and try it. It's worth it. And if that's the way you can get it, more will be available. And the more that you're around it, and the more that you want to be around it, the more you want to eat it. I've found the more it shows up, and the more it shows up in these incredibly beautiful ways. Like this Haudenosaunee black sweet corn is just one of few. I'll show you, because since I'm my own cameraman today, I'll show you that I actually have this like sitting right here in front of me, all these different varieties of corn, just because it's comforting to have them right here, you know, and I look at them and I think of what I can make with them and how inspiring they are. And I know that I got that from, you know, the Utes, or I know that I got this corn from Tanya, or that one from Becky Webster, or however I got all of these ingredients. You know, this was actually grown by my seed saver out of Minnesota, and I've been saving them, and I only have like 3 or 4 of these little guys left, but I know where all of my ingredients came from, and knowing that and being mindful of that, it is so much more comforting, because it isn't just going to the store and buying something. If that's the way you have to do it, then that's the way you have to do it, and you can still get this different level of nourishment from those foods. But taking the time to find that, you know, this wild rice is Jack's wild rice. If anybody's heard me talk about it, this is my favorite wild rice. And I know Jack, and Jack drives down from Bemidji every year with however much rice he can spare to give me, and I will pay him whatever he asks and buy as much as he brings me, because it's so delicious. And to me, it's not just because it's one of the best wild rices I've ever seen, but it's because Jack got it with his grandsons, and he shared that knowledge, and then he showed them how to traditionally parch it, and then he packaged it for me specifically in my community. And the first time Jack gave me any rice a few years ago, he said, I want you to feed, you know, the people that need this the most with this. And he just gave me some, and I took it to the veterans, and I made them a dish at the holidays, and I took it to some spirit meals, and every time I used Jack's rice, I thought about him and those intentions that he wanted me to share with the people I was cooking for. And when you add that level of attention and mindfulness and connection to your food, you can't help but be nourished in a different way. So that being said, I'm going to add this wild rice to my pot back here.
And we did have a question regarding the recipe here. Someone asks, you said 2 quarts of water with the turkey leg. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you need to add more, you can add more. Like there's not, we don't need to make gigantic kettles of soup in my house, so that this is like the size that I'm using, and I just want to make sure that the water is enough to keep the vegetables that I add in there covered. And so I'm going to keep this going, the wild rice and the corn, because they all take different amounts of time to cook. And if I put them in the one pot, then I'm going to have soft vegetables before I have my wild rice or my corn done. So I'd like to cook them separately and then add them at the end together after I have, you know, when it comes to the corn and the wild rice. Sometimes the wild rice will have a tendency to overcook and turn mushy on you, or you don't want that to happen.
Comment, someone says, that's from what you were saying before about your sources for your rice and your corn. This is a new definition of comfort food, perhaps, that we are comforted knowing that it's personal, local sources. I thought that was really nice.
And really, so one of the things when I was, you know, learning to cook from my grandmothers, and I know that a lot of Indigenous people are taught this way, is that you cook with intention, you cook with those prayers and those good thoughts. And actually with my WildBearies crew, I don't let them come into the kitchen if they're upset, and I am not in the kitchen if I'm upset. You know, it's because those feelings and those emotions go into these meals, and it does comfort you. I could make the same pot of soup as my grandma, and I can tell you that it wouldn't taste half as good, because my grandma's love went into her soup. And even though I might put my own kind of prayers and feelings into the meals that I serve my family, it just wouldn't match what my grandma would give me. And so I think that, you know, when you bring that component in, there's just a different level of flavor that gets added to your food when you add care and, you know, good thoughts and intentions to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and add, I have my carrots and my celery, and I'm just going to put them in the pot here.
Yeah, and Courtney says that's how her Ho-Chunk grandmother taught and passed on food and other traditions. And she said before that her family used to make fry bread and fry bread tacos at MATC and other events. Do you ever make fry bread tacos, Elena?
You know, I'm not gonna lie, and some people, there are a wide variety, and we span the spectrum on thoughts of decolonized eating when it comes to Indigenous chefs. And me personally, I'll share this story because it does tie in with my grandma, is there were times when we didn't have enough, you know, and making bread, like fry bread and ground beef or ground venison, and adding to that to create this taco would give us enough for whoever was in our household, because it was never just, you know, my grandma. I mean, I was there, I was part of the crew that was there. And it was wonderful because our grandma's house was always full and full of laughter. But sometimes people were there out of necessity and they needed help, and you don't, somehow there was always enough. And sometimes it was because we were able to make bread. And is it a good decision to eat on a regular? Absolutely not. But once in a while, I like to make it for my family. I'll make it each, you know, my kids can request it once a year. My brother comes up at the holidays and I make it for him, but it's not something that we have regularly. And part of that is because it honors the struggle, the resilience that my grandparents and beyond have had when it comes to finding enough to feed the community, their family, you know, and making something out of nothing and having that be some sort of comfort, because it did carry us through times when there might not have been enough of other stuff. And so I like to have it once in a while to honor that, but it's not something that you should eat very regularly. It's like deep fried processed flour. So, I'm just adding to the pot. I added my carrots that I diced up, and then I just kind of diced up the celery. And I'm going to now peel this and cut it up while we're talking a little bit. But it's really just, I like to think of it, I don't know if anybody's read that book, Stone Soup, but it's kind of like everybody adds a little bit of something to the soup that was started by stones and water, and they end up at the end with this like delicious soup. And I work with the rural urban flow, which is between Sauk County and Milwaukee, and we were talking about that. And for some reason, the stone soup came up because everybody in the community in this book like brought something to contribute to the soup. And I don't have much, but I have an onion, you know, or I don't have much, but I have a squash that I grew. And by the end, they have this wonderful kettle of like nourishing, incredible soup. And I always like to think of that. I mean, especially when you talk about comfort food, it's not necessarily the outcome, it's the feelings that you elicit when you have those memories, or, you know, the sharing and the community, and it's really the connection. Food is this incredible vessel of communicating. You can transport people to different places, different times in their life by a meal. And I think that when you have meals made out of indigenous ingredients or ancestral ingredients to whatever ancestry you're connected with, there is some sort of comfort, because you know that you're not isolated and you're not alone, and that others have had these same kinds of meals. And it might have been something that your grandma made for you, and that meal brought you back to that time when you felt safe and comfortable by your grandma. You know, it's something that you are capable of redefining for yourself, what is comforting. And I think part of that is really mindful consumption, and taking the time to know where your ingredients come from help do that for you. Because I know that I'm not going to waste the squash. My grandma grew it for me she sent it back with my daughter who interned at the farm and helped her grow it. Like, this isn't something that's going to end up in the trash. This is something that I'm going to save for a day like today, when I want to share with you what truly comforting food is to me, or what causes those feelings of comfort when I cook.
Yeah, and we've had several comments in the chat about grandmothers and how connected grandmothers often are with our food traditions and our ideas about comfort. And someone says, grandmothers are awesome, exclamation point. That's great. We have had a couple comments asking if you could show how you're chopping. People would love to see your technique, if it's possible to give us another view of your cutting board.
Yeah, but like I said, though, the only thing is I can't cut and show you at the same time. So I can show you what I have been cutting.
Sure.
Give
No
me
problem.
a second here. But yeah, I'm just kind of cubing the squash up because I like biting into a squash. And so I peeled it. I took the seed bulb off the bottom, and I might scoop this out and roast it later, but I like to save the seeds, so I want to take the time to do that afterwards. And the top is really what you're after. So like I said, I just kind of like to cube it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to add that. So in here I have the smoked turkey, the corn cob, and the corn I cut off of it, the butternut squash, the carrot, and the celery. And right now I'm just finishing cutting up the other side of the squash there. I'll put that in. And I'm going to do the onion, but I'm just going to slice it in half. I'll show you this way. This way, and then like this. Because we actually really love onion here in our house, and my kids don't mind eating a giant chunk of onion. So it really is kind of based on what you prefer to have and what you really want to add to it. It's kind of like the stone soup. You can add what you'd like. I love the base of the smoked turkey leg. Like I said, the bone gives it a really nice flavor, and the smoked turkey meat is just delicious.
Yeah, I'm excited to make this. I don't know if I've ever had smoked turkey in my soup like that, and so I'm excited to. I was gonna cook along, but I think I'm gonna do the moderating instead and make the soup afterwards. But I'm excited for that taste. I was wondering.
I'm adding this.
Oh,
just
nice.
so you guys can see, I'm going to add this to the soup kettle.
I was just wondering, do you have any, sort of a personal question, but do you have any tips and tricks for cutting onions without causing tears?
A sharp knife really makes a difference in, if you're really breaking, it's kind of like a scientific thing, right? If you're really breaking apart those cells, then by a dull knife, then it's releasing a lot more. By having a sharp knife, and I'll show you mine because I just love it. It'll cut through a lot faster and sharper, and you won't have that much of the vapor going. You can still get an incredibly strong onion that'll make you cry, but having a sharp knife makes a world of difference in everything you do in the kitchen. It's a tool that is a necessity, and I don't think that people realize it when they have their own at home. Like my daughter always likes to use the duller knives, and she's like, I'm scared, but it's actually more dangerous to use the duller knife because you don't have much control as you would with the sharper knife. So that's a little pro tip, is make sure your knives are always sharp. And there's places around that you can go and get it done professionally for like $3-4 a knife, and it's worth it in my opinion. So I'm just going to get these ready, but they're not quite, I'm not going to add them yet because the summer squash or the yellow squash and the zucchini take a lot less time to cook. So I'm going to just show you, I like half moon cut them. So I cut it in half and then slice down the side there. And I'm going to add those at the very end.
So what have we got in there now for folks that are following along with the recipe?
So we have carrots and celery, butternut squash, onion, the smoked turkey, and the corn on the cob, the corn cob. So I have it all in here in this one. Let me see. Hold on a second. Let me grab you guys. Let me bring you over here with me. So this is my corn going here. And I just have that on a low roll. My wild rice is in the back there. And that's just getting ready to go, but that's not going to take very long. And then I have this pot with the corn cob. You can see the squash and the onion, and then the turkey leg. And I am going to cover that and just let it simmer as we continue the conversation, because everything now just needs to kind of slowly cook as we go along. And then by the end, I'll be able to show you what it looks like. I also, and this is something that I have grown at the farm and kind of get it sent to me in bundles and then just hang to dry, but I love this culinary sage. We have wild sage, which is a different flavor, and sometimes we use that in like our traditional or our ceremonial cooking, but this culinary sage is so good. And this one actually came from Alice's garden in Milwaukee, and my good friend Venus Williams down there that always gives me these incredible herbs at the end of the season. I kind of get to go, and I think this year I was there the day before it frosted, so like the last possible day that you could harvest these herbs, I was down there with my scissors, like really trying to get as much as I could, because it is so delicious. And with turkey, I know that they have like poultry blends and stuff, but having just a few leaves of this dried sage or fresh sage and putting them in your pot, it enhances the flavor. I mean, it's like the perfect complement, like the perfect natural complement to turkey is sage. And so I'm just going to take a couple of these leaves here and add them to my pot, and then we can put the lid back on. And
someone was asking, their turkey leg doesn't fit in the pot totally. Does that matter? What would you?
Oh, because it's already cooked. And so what I'm really doing is drawing the flavor from the skin out and then from the bones, because it is already smoked and I kind of opened it up. I'm really just tenderizing it, and I'll pull that apart when once it kind of gets going and the other vegetables in there cooking a little bit. I'll pull that out and pull the meat off the bone, and then add just the meat and take the bone out so that you don't have that big obtrusion. But there's a significant amount of meat on the turkey leg, and so that one turkey leg is going to be more than enough for the entire pot of soup.
Nice. I was wondering about the sage. It seems like you have a lot of like ingredients that are powerful in the Native American community in this soup: wild rice, corn, and sage. And I, at least in my from where I'm standing, it seems like sage is often has a lot of spiritual meaning in Native American communities. Is that true for you, or?
Yeah, and so there's, I mean, it's one of these powerful herbs. You have the sage, the sweetgrass, the cedar, and then you have this tobacco that's like the activator, and you kind of cleansing sages. And there's, for me, sage reminds me of my dad's house in South Dakota in the summertime, and sitting in the prairie and smelling the fresh sage. And I always like to add it to my meals because it takes me back to that moment. It's that comfort that we're talking about and that connection to food. So yeah, sage it's just this amazing herb taste wise too, to add it. Like I said, it's a perfect complement to a poultry.
Nice.
Yeah.
We had some other
So
comments.
this is just,
oh yeah. No, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, Sally Anna, this is just going to go for a little bit. So I don't know if we want to further the conversation with Lucy, and then I can just check back in, and after a while.
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes. Any questions that are coming up for folks regarding just the cooking before we move on to a little more discussion? Not seeing anything immediately. There was lots of nice thoughts after I asked my question about the onions. We had lots of nice comments about people's strategies.
I was going to refrigerating. People have a lot of tips and tricks. Yeah.
So I've got
sometimes they just make you cry though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucy, was there anything that was coming up in our conversation so far or in the chat that strikes you in particular that you wanted to bring into our conversation again?
Well, one of the things that really strikes me, when I mentioned that, the concept of comfort food tends to be used in, for sort of superficial kinds of stresses. And what Elena is talking about is much deeper, spiritual connections. And, it goes back to the existential anxieties that I was talking about. And it really seems to me that, that part of what is going on with comfort food in mainstream American society is people tend to dismiss the significance of food, the power of food to connect us and to mean things beyond just food. Whereas in Native American cultures, the attitudes towards food already take into account, that it's a much deeper kind of thing. So you really have to kind of ask, well, is the category of comfort food, is that even relevant for talking about Native American food? It almost sounds to me like all food is intentionally treated as something that will be comforting, which is very, very different from, the Anglo-American mainstream approach.
Elena, do you feel like that's true for you?
Like, in a lot of ways, yes, because, and I think that we kind of mentioned this the other day too, that there is the difference between comfort and nourishment when it comes to food. And for me, I don't think of it necessarily as comfort as much as I think of it as like it nourishes my spirit, and its comfort might be temporary, where this, to me, our food is like long-term nourishing. There is so much thought put into every ingredient and care that it comforts your spirit. It's not just this immediate fix that we were talking about earlier of an ice cream or being naughty. Like, this nourishes and it is comforting. It's like a warm hug from my grandma, and Jack and Tanya and everybody that contributed to helping make this meal possible. And so I think what we need to really do is consider the language that we were talking about. I just turned it down a little bit because the lid's on. In being mindful, in saying that this narrative doesn't need to be that comfort is naughty or that you need to be punished by it, but that comfort is nourishing, and that our food can be nourishing, and that accessibility is a problem for not just non-Indigenous people. It's a problem for me also. Some of the work that I do is to increase production so that accessibility can be possible on not just my family, my community, but beyond, so that we can share this unique way to feed yourself with other people. And does it have to be regularly every single day? No, we don't eat like that at our house. Like, this meal we'll look forward to it, or the blue corn mush that we might have tomorrow morning. It's getting those flavors and those connections into your home and sharing that and being mindful of it, whatever it is, especially during this holiday season when we all kind of celebrate different cultures and however that relatability is to a larger community, that we're mindful with that, that those stories of when I made, potato pancakes or whatever with my grandma, that those bring her to the table as well, whether or not she's here still. And when you have ingredients like the wild rice that was hand harvested, or this corn that was given to my friend that showed my daughter how to grow it, it just nourishes you differently, and you value that, and you value those meals a lot more than, a mindless drive-through, which everybody has to do sometimes, you know, but it's a connection. And the more that we're able to do that, the stronger that connection is, and the better chance for these ingredients across cultures, whatever they are, will have in continuing in these traditions and these, you know, food stories that we all carry in some way.
You know, I think also, part of what we're seeing here, it's a completely different philosophy of food and our connections to food and our connections to nature. So it's not just a matter of eating certain foods. It's a matter of how we're thinking about the world in general, and our place within it. So I see, Millie Ron, who's also a folklorist, and has also done a lot of work on food, and mentions if we look beyond Anglo-American foods, we do see these attitudes towards food as being something meaningful, being something that can be very positive. In these other traditions outside the Anglo-American, particularly Protestant, sort of philosophical foundation, people do recognize that food is something that can nourish us. It's kind of interesting, because the rise of foodie culture, and I'm sure everyone is familiar with foodies, and the stereotypes of foodies, but in some ways, these are the people who are coming out of mainstream American culture who are trying to recognize the central role that food can play and the significance of food, but we kind of make fun of them. So I think it's very interesting to see how so much of this ties into different cultures.
Yeah, and we've had some comments about, Courtney says, we mentioned foods that were rationed by our ancestors and how we were able to make big meals out of a little. It also created an environment where we could share with our families, especially large families, and create community through nourishment. So some of those experiences of discomfort, of lack, of not having a lot, also, yeah, Courtney, did you want to say
Sorry,
something?
yeah, I was just gonna agree with what you're saying. Like, it's, I come from a large family, and we always have to make like a ton of food for whenever we're having events or whatever. But it comes from a history where we were past like literally the underbelly of foods, and we had to learn to create meals out of dishes that normal people wouldn't eat. And then we were able to create this entire community of a different type of food, a different type of comfort when we get together with our families and out like other parts of our family, extended family, things like that. And basically just it created this whole sense of community, and even dealing with the fact that we're eating food that maybe some people wouldn't consider that's the type of food that they want to eat or something like that,
Maybe that's part of that resiliency,
yeah,
the word resilience that Elena talks about a lot.
yeah, exactly. So I'm feeling that totally.
Yeah, and Courtney, I heard you say the word like normal, what normal people would eat, right? Well,
Right.
that's not what we ate. And
Right.
that's why it affected us so deeply, because
Exactly.
in giving those during those times, there was a lot of loss. And when I say that, we are so lucky to have had those knowledge keepers share and save and know how important this was for us to enjoy it today, that we continue that momentum for the future. And that we say that we ate that way because we had to. Like during boarding schools and removals and all these things, I don't like to say trauma, because I do like to focus on resilience. Like, we are here today because my ancestors were incredibly amazing people.
Exactly.
And so I like to focus on that. And we made what we had to make out of that, but we lost a lot of knowledge during that time.
Yeah.
And there was a classism thing that people put us in with status and going to the grocery store, and
Right.
is kind of a way to lose this knowledge. But
Right.
luckily, there were people that did find that comfort and that connection in cultivation and hunting and
Yeah.
butchering and all of those other points. And now here we are today, being able to feel the nourishment and the comfort because of that. And it's important to retain those memories of those times of struggle, but it's also important to acknowledge that we live in such a plentiful area,
Yeah.
that the more knowledge that we share and we bring back, and we say that it isn't intimidating, because it really is intimidating sometimes, that we're here to walk alongside you, and that you will get this nourishment, and that it is here because you need it.
Right.
Like you came here
Right.
to hear about this, to feel this connection, because it brought you
Yeah.
together. And that's why I say food is this great communicator, this great vessel. It's a universal, and it connects us all so strongly. So thank you for that. And,
Oh, yeah.
and like I said, I just don't like to linger. It's
Right.
there. It has
Right.
been acknowledged. There
Exactly.
is trauma, but there's trauma across a lot of different cultures. And the way we feel it is different. The way we are capable of healing is different. And part of the way I do that is by acknowledging that our food is medicine.
And I totally agree with you. And I agreed with your comments about, it's about the love and care you put into the food that you make. It literally transcribes, and it like translates in that food. It tastes better when you put your love and care into something you've made. I've noticed that when I cook, like if I'm like not really into it and not feeling well or something like that, it's like it doesn't taste as good as when you're just sitting there and you're just making art and you're just like throwing it all together and you're feeling it and loving it and everything. So absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I can take you over here real quick so you can peek at the pot. We'll take a look and see that it's kind of going. I have all these nice little components floating and getting a little bit softer. My corn is looking pretty done also, and my wild rice, I am going to rinse that really quick too, and then show you what it looked like. What it looks like. With the wild rice, I like to shock it or give it a nice really cold water bath so that it stops the cooking process, because once I add it to that soup, it'll overcook if I don't do that. So I'm just going to quick do that, and I'm listening to you guys.
No problem. We have an interesting story from Lynn Williamson, who's really enjoyed just the story about how you got your corn as a precious gift from a dear friend. She says, it reminded me of an Oneida woman, Carol Cornelius, who has written a lot about corn and its role in Haudenosaunee life as a metaphor for life-giving substance. In the creation story, corn grew from the breasts of Sky Woman. Grew from the breasts of Sky Woman after she was buried in the earth that formed on the back of the turtle. In one of Carol's papers, is, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, Kacha Tsiatsla, Strength of Belief and Vision as a People, is a case study of Oneida resilience and corn. Several times, Lynn says she ate her corn soup and scones mixed with ham on Six Nations in Ontario, such a hearty and sustaining meal that immediately reminds us of the creation story and of the three sisters. Daily life and deep heritage are so linked. I just thought that was a lovely reflection there about the significance of corn in Native culture. And of course, in the United States, we're one of the largest corn producing countries in the world. We export corn all over the place into other parts of the Americas, and the corn that we make, that we grow here in the U.S., a lot of it is one kind of corn, this yellow corn, sweet corn. A lot of it is from the same genome. Monsanto and these companies sell the corn seeds that are kind of clones of each other, and I think sometimes we forget, even in like white American culture, corn is also huge, and the fact that we're such a big corn producing country has has made corn, a big part of our foodways, across the board in America and all kinds of ethnic communities. But I don't think as Americans, sometimes we don't think about, that corn is really a very diverse crop, and it's a crop that has a lot of power in it. And I think that's, maybe something that we can be reminded of as a people sometimes through stories like that. So yeah. We had talked briefly about when Courtney and Elena were talking about Elena doesn't like to prefers not to use the word trauma, but some of these experiences in the past in Native culture and history. We were talking about fry bread as being a food that has some baggage with it. And I kind of think about that when I think about what you were talking about before, Lucy, with discomfort in food. That foods can be comforting and also discomforting, or maybe comforting and at the same time also have these sort of complicated histories to them. Do you have anything more to add about discomfort and food, Lucy? Oh, you're muted there, Lucy.
Okay. Yeah, there's so many discomforts connected to food in general, but then there are discomforts that are very specific to this time of the pandemic. One of the things that we have done is we've taken all the different steps in foodways, from production all the way to cleanup and disposal. And we've asked people, well, what are some of the discomforts that you are experiencing when it comes to producing food or procuring food? So we've been trying to catalog those discomforts, and then what we're finding is that people are also creating ways to comfort themselves anyway. What I can do, I don't know if now's the best time, I can go through the different steps in foodways. This is partly just to kind of, get people thinking. And, there's so many aspects of foodways that we kind of take for granted. Shopping, that was a chore. How many of us used to think of, oh, good, I get to go shopping. This is my social highlight of the week, and then with the pandemic, shopping became so scary. And, so all of a sudden we're realizing, oh, I miss the routine of going shopping. I miss the opportunity to run into people informally at the grocery store. I miss being able to just browse and see what new products they have. So part of what's happening because of the pandemic is the various discomforts that we're experiencing are making us realize how meaningful and how significant all these different little practices and activities were. These were things that previously we just thought of as chores, or just, it's just part of everyday life. Think about something like leftovers. If you're concerned about the possibility of being able to restock your ingredients, you're not going to be casually tossing things out as much. You're going to be reusing, recycling ingredients in foods. I also remember there was a video from, I think it was from Italy, and the lockdowns there were so severe, so strict, that people were not allowed out of their apartment building except to throw out the trash. So when it was their day and time to take their trash out of their apartment, they would do all sorts of very, very creative things. There was a ballet dancer who he would perform a dance for everyone while he was holding his trash bag. Other people would go out and hold up signs to their friends and all. This is very, very creative stuff. And I don't say that as like, oh, isn't this fun? It takes us back to that idea of resilience. That humans need these connections, and they are going to find ways to connect. Okay? And food actually offers us all these opportunities that most of the time we overlook because they just seem so everyday. And so part of what the pandemic is doing is making us now appreciate all these little things. So should I run through the different steps in foodways? Should we do that?
Sure.
now?
I did have one cooking related question I got just for Elena quick. Someone asks, do you cut your squash lengthwise or crosswise? Oh, you're muted there, Elena.
So I usually take the seed ball off and then peel it and cut it so it's like a cylinder, and then cut it into steaks and then cut from there.
Okay.
So
cool. And then I had just one more question for you, Elena, before Lucy moves on to talk about foodways. Someone said after I gave my little soapbox about corn in America, someone says most of corn in the U.S. is produced to feed cows. It feeds meat culture. And also someone mentioned ethanol and fuel, but I was thinking, Elena, you had mentioned to me that you are also, you do a lot of wild game. You're like a butcher, or you do a lot of harvesting of wild game. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about bringing meat into your cooking and sustainability and resilience with meat.
yeah, I do, because a lot of people say, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that there is so much diversity in food preference that I am not judgmental. I love looking at the holistic view. For me personally, my great grandma was a butcher. Like, she was known for wild game butchery, specifically, turtles and fish and venison, and being able to, like, muskrat, anything. She knew how to do it. And then as I was getting older, and I would love helping her and hearing her talk about it and explain it to me in Ho-Chunk and tell me where this gland is, or what this meat tastes like different. And all of those memories around wild game are associated with my great grandma and then my grandmothers, who, naturally became these incredible specialists. And there was one particular summer where my grandpa, it seemed like every other day there was like a turkey or a groundhog or like all these things outside the house when I got home from work, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, now I have to take care of this, because there's no waiting, like you have to take care of it. And my grandma was always there to teach me. And it's just something that with us, these incredible women have been butchers and have been known for caring for animals. And I know that there's a lot of talk about, vegetables and alternative proteins. But one of the things that my great grandma said to me, and I remember saying this again to one of my younger cousins at one time, be like, what she would have said to you? Because she said, this animal tributed itself to give us its spirit and its life. And as I process it, I'm going to care for it, and I'm going to pray for it, and I'm going to thank it for doing that for us. And I'm not going to take that for granted. Like, it is here for our family, whether or not it was, a pet rabbit or a groundhog or whatever it was that was going to feed our family. We're going to care for that animal and accept that nutrition that way. And I've always lived by that. And so, I'm a cultivator. I have my own garden. I have my own farm. I absolutely love plants. I could turn the camera around and you could see that I'm actually multiplying beans that were given to me from an Arikara fellow, so that I'll have enough to plant for next year over the winter. it's just that for me, that connection to that spirituality and to my grandmothers and my great grandmothers and to those animals and their presence on the earth is why I really take pride in my butchery and having that, wild game specialist or however it's more of a connection to them and honoring their knowledge and the way they shared it with me.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And we had one other food related question. I've had two questions now about sage. Someone asks, what is the impact if you have fresh sage versus dried sage? And then someone was also wondering, when you said culinary sage, what does that mean versus other kinds of sage?
So there's a wild sage that I will make into, salves, or I might use it to smudge my house, and I go and get that from a certain place out in the wild. And I use that for cooking, but not on every day. Like the culinary sage is the herbs that were grown in an environment that I know that I can use that for cooking, and it's not contaminated by pesticides or other things that might sometimes get into wild sage, So I like to make sure that the stuff that I use for cooking, especially for events, is something that is, done in a food safe manner, or grown in that manner, or processed or taken care of. And the stuff that I do get from the wild, like I said, occasionally, if I know where it's coming from, like where specifically the surrounding environment is, I might use that differently, or I might add it to salt to season my salt, so it's a finisher instead of a predominant flavor. Because the wild sage is a lot stronger. So is the fresh sage. So use that sparingly, and remember that you can always add more, but you can't take it away. Once you put it in there, it's in there. So kind of do it based on your flavor.
Got to add more turkey leg to compensate.
Yeah. Turkey legs, yeah.
All right, Lucy, did you want to go into more about foodways as a topic of culture and inquiry?
Sure. And I don't want this to be like a classroom lecture. So feel free to be responding in the chat room and to think about this stuff. These ideas, they're sort of like frameworks for thinking more deeply about food. And then see what's useful for you. Also, I want to mention too that that a lot of what Elena is talking about, it contrasts with the contemporary industrial food system, which unfortunately is not just in the U.S. It is global. And it developed along with industrialization and urbanization. It is what allows people to live in cities, is what allows people to, to work in an office 9 hours a day instead of spending some time milking the cow and doing all that, But the industrial food system has also, it separates us from all these different processes around food that Elena has been talking about, from knowing where that food actually came from. And knowing how to actually do things, knowing where the meat comes from and knowing how that actually happened. So there are a lot of people right now who are working to recouple, repeople the food system and to take it back. Within the industrial food system, food is not even food, it's simply a commodity. And there are a lot of organizations, a lot of people are trying to take that back. So with foodways, we usually think of it as kind of like starting from the beginning for an individual. It goes from production, procurement, preservation, preparation, presentation, consumption, and then cleanup. Okay, so what we did was we looked at what were the discomforts that people were finding with production. Most people are now not actually producing their own food. However, people were very concerned about breakages in the food supply. and we saw all sorts of shortages in supermarkets, and people were afraid that the whole supply chain was breaking down. So we actually started seeing a lot of people trying to now produce their own food. Gardening took off. And initially, people were thinking of that in very pragmatic terms. If you can't purchase things at the supermarket, then you have to farm and grow your own. People were then starting to find, working in the soil like that, watching things grow from the seed to the actual fruit, vegetable, it gave people a sense of connection, connectedness to the seasons, a connection to the soil. A lot of people said that it was spiritually nourishing to them. Okay, and there actually are a number of studies, which show that gardening is something that is very emotionally soothing and mentally relaxing for people, and that it definitely can be considered a spiritual exercise in many ways. So that's an example of how a discomfort also created an opportunity for comfort. And there are plenty of people who garden who already know this. They're saying, well, we could have told you that. But because of the pandemic and fears about the food supply, people started purposely and intentionally gardening just to allay that fear. Procurement would be shopping. Okay, and we already mentioned the fear of going into grocery stores. I know some friends of mine started going up to Costco every 2 weeks, and they would take orders from us. And then they would do the shopping. They'd bring the bags, they'd set them on the porch, so we wouldn't have any actual physical contact. We'd leave the money in an envelope out there. We'd look out the door, and wave, So, it ended up affirming friendship, and it created a lot of social bonds, and it was really nice to know that there were people who were caring for me, and then when I was able to start going shopping, I would do that for other people, so I never thought of shopping as a way to build community. That's exactly what happened, and we were hearing from a lot of people about things like that. Also, think about, and instead of going to a supermarket, a lot of people started going to farmers markets. Those were outdoors. They felt safer there. Okay. There also was a huge surge in home chickens, backyard chickens, and people getting eggs, just buying eggs from their neighbors or from local farmers if they happen to be close to rural areas. Preservation. Preservation is not something most of us think about because refrigerators are so available, so easily available, and supermarkets tend to be very available. Historically, preserving food was a major, it took a major amount of time, and it was a huge issue. If you didn't preserve your food from the harvest, you were going to starve during the winter. Unfortunately, we have gotten away from that. So that in some ways, people talk about pickling and canning, and it's just kind of recreation. Well, suddenly this was no longer recreation, but it was also necessity. And so there was a shortage, not on canning jars, but on the lids that go into canning jars. So there was a shortage on that. So people started, they were purchasing air dryers for fruits and vegetables. And there were all sorts of recipes being shared online and through magazines, for how to make freezer pickles and things of that sort. So I also saw a cartoon where a woman, dressed in like the 1950s said, "Oh, and you thought what I was doing, and it shows her in this kitchen with all these home canned goods, and you thought what I was doing was old fashioned, and all those old fashioned kind of skills, people started realizing, oh, we need this. At the same time, it gave practical comfort. It also gave them a sense of, and I know this for myself, the sense of agency. I can do this myself. I can make my own pickles. It gave me a sense of control over, okay, now I do know that I have these foods. And all of that was very comforting. It allayed some of the fears that I had. So also with preservation, I know a lot of people said that one of the first things they did, and I did this too, I went through my freezer and my cupboards and just kind of took stock of what I had. I also cleaned out. It was kind of embarrassing, to find some of the things that were in there. But a lot of them carried memories. There would be a piece of cake that I had put in there for my daughter's birthday, and then it was 7 years ago, and here it was in the back of my freezer, and so there were all these memories, coming out while I was cleaning, and then having that sense of order afterwards. It made me feel like, there's so much chaos in the universe, and I can't control any of it. I can't predict what's going on, but I can predict what's in my freezer. So just this kind of very, very small little tiny universe, that I could control.
Yeah.
That I found that very comforting.
I'm hearing a couple things I just wanted to ask Elena about. First of all, when you were talking about, canning and some of these food preservation methods, someone asked, Elena, is there particular preservation practices in the Ho-Chunk tradition, canning and drying, that you could tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, and Lucy, I love listening to you talk about how things are right now, but this is the way, like as an Indigenous, as a Ho-Chunk chef, I have had to exist. And for us to maintain these food traditions, one of the things I like to say is, I have an incredible field close to me of wild sunflowers, which are delicious. And you can use them in tea, you could use them fresh, you can dry them. I mean, there's so many uses for these wild sunflowers. Every day that they're in bloom, I'll go and take one basket full, even though acres of these wild sunflowers, because I know when I go home, I have to wash them carefully, and I have to select the ones that I'm going to use for drying. And then I have to put them in my solar dehydrator or one of those, round dehydrators, and dehydrate them and then put them away. And if I have enough energy to do it the next day, I'll go back and get them. And this year, I went every day for a week. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't want to eat these sunflowers. I don't want to look at these sunflowers, but I know that they're in my cupboard. And I know that when I'm ready for them, I'll have them because I did that. Like that, the only way I can have this corn is if I know that during harvest, 2 weeks of my life will be dedicated to, sun up to sundown, boiling, processing, drying, braiding this corn so that it'll be there. And because those mindful practices have been kept in place for centuries throughout our people is why we have that food today. So we didn't really have the luxuries that you're talking about, Lucy, about like, oh my gosh, now I have to learn how to do this. Like the only way we can have these foods is if we continue to know how to do that and continue to practice doing it and stuff. And I am the one who bought all the lids because they were finally available.
Well,
but just for a quick second, so you can see, I have the wild rice here and I have the corn done. And I just want you to see how beautiful this is, because it's worth every minute that we spend caring for it. And it cares for us, for years beyond when we take the time to stop and do that. And And in our lives, if we have these 9-to-5 jobs, afterwards, we have to go and still be ho-chunk and make sure that we have these things continuing, that we don't have the luxury of saying, oh my gosh, I'm never going to use this. Like, this was grown for me and I will use it and I must process it so that I can. And if it's not for me, then, one of these amazing things that you were talking about, and we mentioned this before, is there is a time of isolation right now, and seclusion and food insecurities, and not food deserts, because we have a very plentiful area that we live in here and all around, really, but food junkyards are what we live in. And so how do we change that narrative to get it to be like, do you have any idea how excited I am to eat this rice, or this turkey leg that I shredded and I'm going to put it in the pot, but this corn especially, like I've been sneaking it when I turn around to check this, see if it's done. It's all of those things that you have to be mindful of in transitioning, and knowing that it's not a new concept, that, and it isn't old fashioned, that there are people doing it today. And that's the only way that we continue to know how to do it, is by taking the time to learn. And I think that this has been a wonderful opportunity to see the beauty in people, to see the camaraderie, and to see them step up and help support these food systems and growing and reaching out for these seeds and feeling that connection. Because when you grow, you also become a steward of the land. It's just natural, something that you become a little bit more mindful about what is around you, and the plants and the animals, and this life that is, when you do sometimes go to work every day and have these routines, that you get these blinders and you don't see all of the beauty around you. And I think that shifting that narrative to what you're talking about, Lucy, a little bit more towards, learning how to preserve, how to be mindful when you're at the grocery store even, and not just grabbing things off the shelf, but being like, am I going to eat this in the near future? And is this going to be usable? And is it good for me, or whatever, and not have it be like, I'm going to buy this because I've been bad, because I want to be bad, but I'm nourishing myself and it's going to be comforting,
Yeah, a second part of what Lucy was talking about, I was going to ask you about, Elena, when Lucy was talking about having this little kind of self-sustaining universe. I think we're all becoming a lot more aware of that during COVID, of like being able to sustain ourselves out of our homes. And I just wonder, I know that you have a little farm and do a lot of these kind of self-sustaining practices. And I just wondered if you could say something about that, like in your own life, in the Ho-Chunk community, more broadly, or also how has COVID changed your thoughts about, sustaining yourself in this time in your community?
So I think it's more than just COVID. It's a time in our lives where we have endured the Industrial Revolution and the Great Depression and all these other transitions, that we're here today. And what are our food sources? There's laws that allow chemicals to be sprayed on everything that we eat out of convenience, really. So making those transitions and really showing that it's like cool to appreciate how much our food has to offer makes it so much neater to grow your own, or to go and participate in. So I'm not a hunter, but I like the butchery part of it, and so I like to participate, and I'm part of the community, but not necessarily the harvesting part of it, and so I think that the mindfulness and the connection has definitely built a stronger community during these times in a beautiful way. But these seeds are coming home to us, and there's this whole unspoken journey of these incredible, they're life-bearing beings, and they come to us, and how they've been showing up has been incredible. Like I said, I'm multiplying seeds that my Arikara friend gave to me, and he gave them to me because he said, his mother, and for Arikaras, they're a matrilineal society, and the women are the ones that grow everything except for tobacco. The men grow the tobacco. The women are known for growing everything else. And when I was like, I love, it's the year of the bean for us here. We declared it. It's the year of the bean. We're going to find these beans, you know, and they're going to be delicious alternative proteins for people interested. And when I went to visit him at his farm, which is actually at the United Tribes Technical College, I went to visit with the students there and support them in agriculture. And he came and he said, you can, you know, get enough seeds to start something for your home, because I want the females behind you to see what you're doing. And my grandma said that when you came, that I could give you these beans. And I was like, what, you know, what an amazing thing. That seed brought itself to me, and it came, and now it's like multiplying amazingly. And I'm so excited to be able to plant that for my family and for my community in this garden. And I know the kids that have been watching these seeds like slowly grow more beans are excited to plant them next year. And so I think just starting that momentum, it really is a ripple that we can create gigantic waves by. And part of that is building community like this.
Yes, definitely. Just wanted to also, for folks that are following along with your cooking, I saw you add the wild rice and the corn just now.
I added the corn, and I'm going to add the turkey, and the last thing I'm going to do is add the wild rice. But it's all coming together. It's almost ready.
Did the zucchini and the yellow squash get added yet?
Yes, I added those when I pulled the turkey leg.
Okay.
So I pulled the turkey leg and made room.
When was that you pulled the turkey leg?
When Lucy started talking again, so
Okay.
a little after 6, yeah.
Sounds good. Just wanting to note for folks, perhaps we'll try to send out a recipe as well afterwards.
I'll show you guys what it looks like. Can you see it okay?
Beautiful.
See the sage and everything. It's coming together so good, and it smells delicious, just in case you guys were wondering.
Nice. And we did have a comment. Someone says that they'd really like to see your multiplying beans. Could we see?
Okay, do you guys want to take a walk with me? I'll show you, because I've also been looking at these beans the entire time we've been talking. So here they are, right there. You can see they're kind of coming out. I only had 20 beans to start, and I left some at the Sikangu Three Sisters Garden in Rosebud. And so I wanted to make sure that they would be successful, and I planted 3. And so far, in the first sprouts, I have like 4 or 5 pods that look incredible. And I'm so excited because they're beautiful. Give me a second, you guys can I'll grab what they look like so you can see why I'm so excited about them.
Sounds great. In the meantime, Lucy, well, never mind.
Sorry, yeah, here they are. They're called Paint It Like a Horse, and you can see maybe that they look like little brown speckled horses. So I'm pretty excited about that. But all right,
cool.
Sorry, Lucy.
Where did you get those seeds?
These were from the United Tribes Technical College. So the kids, the students out there grew these this year, and I just happened to go there during harvest, and so they shared some, and I'm excited. But this is all I have, so I have to make sure that those are successful. That's what I'm saying. It's a very long process. Like for me to be able to transform these seeds into what I can feed my community, it's like 5 years down the road. It's not something that happens overnight.
And you, when we met to talk about this program, Elena, you mentioned an interesting partnership that you had given some auricera to a garden in Sauk County that you had done like some kind of trade. Could you say something about that? I thought that story was really interesting.
Yeah, so that was corn. And so I don't just work with Indigenous farmers, because I really believe that the way to sustainability and really productivity level is recognizing that we're all connected now, and that I think that segregation in any way is not positive. There is definitely stuff that I will keep to Indigenous communities, but there is also stuff that I'm willing to share. And one of those things is like this glass gem corn, which is a popcorn. It's beautiful and it makes a good hominy. It's tasty, but it's it's more than anything just a stunning, beautiful corn that when people see it, you can't help but wonder more about it, you know? And so I brought that to a couple of the farms in the Driftless region, friends of mine, like Echo Valley Farm, and they grew a small patch out. And part of the reason I brought that there was to make sure that the seed would thrive and that the plants were going to be happy there, and to see how the relationship with the growers and me as a chef were going to be. But developing those relationships for sustainability, for education, and for something where I am able to share that on a different level than I can share something like, you know, Tanya's corn that was given to me for this particular purpose. But if I grow out a little bit more of the glass gem corn, then you might be able to have access to that, Saliana, and have that instead of, you know, something that you had to go to the store and buy and learn. And in learning, you appreciate more. And being able to have that level of education out there and accessibility is really crucial. So I do develop those partnerships with farms that are organic practice, or that, you know, might understand the connection to spirituality and growing a little bit differently, and make sure that those seeds are taken care of in a space that they're protected.
Yeah, and you said that you had found a certain ancestral vegetable that you had given to one of these farms.
Oh yeah, so I mean, it's the story of the seeds and how I said that they are dictating some of this movement. And I always say that, like with WildBearies and with growing and stuff, I'm like along for the ride, and I'm responding to this motion that has already been set forward. I like to think generations back to today, we will be able to do this, and we will start bringing these, you know, seeds and these ingredients back to our people and beyond. And we were looking for, we've had this ancestral corn as hoe chunks, and we were looking for a squash, and it took us a couple of years. The Seed Savers didn't have it, the Smithsonian didn't have it, and then we got the squash was brought. We only started with one squash, and that was 3 years ago. And now we are at a point where I have my own squash. So you guys can see how beautiful this Winnebago squash is. I have it just like in my kitchen here next to me all the time. And I'm curing it as much as possible. We're not actually going to eat this one because I wanted the seeds to be in there as long as they can, so that they have the best chance of, you know, surviving next year when we grow them. But it took us 3 years so that I have one squash to harvest seeds for myself from. And so we had the corn and the squash, and we were like, where is this bean? You know, we wish we had this bean. And then all of a sudden my friend from Appalachia sent me a bean, and it's traceable from the Ho-Chunk moves to coming back to Omaha to South Dakota. And then this bean went and took a long slumber in Kentucky. And we had the corn and we had the squash, and then all of a sudden the bean showed up. And that is actually being multiplied with my seed saver, because I know she'll be successful at it, and I'm kind of a hit or miss. And we only had 10 of those beans. But when it showed up, it actually had its journey documented alongside it, and it was traceable to specific families. And to know that this bean came and was here now for us to nourish us in the same way it did when our ancestors walked back from South Dakota, or when they came back from Nebraska, or when they were here, you know, they came back to us, they rematriated themselves home, because we need that unique nourishment, comfort, nutrition that bean can give our people. And so getting to a point where we can share it with the community will take a while, but it's home and it's here, and we're ready for it, you know. And what more can I do to be ready for what else is going to be coming back to us? And it's really amazing. I mean, we can talk seeds all day, but that's my little, it's very much connected to why I'm on this journey. And it just kind of reinforces that our foods are so unique, and that they are their own beings, and that it does nourish and comfort differently.
And you had given one of these seeds to an African-American farm at one point.
That's a new seed, actually. That's a new one that came, and it's this. This is the Arikara watermelon that I got on my journey. And this watermelon came from the times when Africans were brought over for slavery, and they made contact with the indigenous people, and some were forced nomads and some were forced cultivators. And out of that union of support and relationship building came this incredible watermelon. So this year I'm working on having this watermelon grown out. It'll be grown out in Wisconsin Dells and Madison, and then also at Alice's Garden in Milwaukee with Venus Williams down there. And Alice's Garden is on the site of a former Underground Railroad. So it kind of makes sense that this watermelon came to us at a time when really strengthening those bonds and breaking down those walls that people have put up with race and class and so many other ways that they have categorized us, that we can take that down and say there's food that connects us all.
That's beautiful. People are loving your various terms. Rematriated and food junkyard are terms people are taking away from this. So thank you for those. Someone was also asking, someone says that they thought that Ho-Chunk people were only in Wisconsin. Could you say just a little bit, I know it's a very big topic, but about where Ho-Chunk people have gone in the US and maybe a little bit about why.
Yeah, I mean, well, Ho-Chunks are all over the US. We don't have a reservation, but we are primarily located in Wisconsin, although traditionally we were through the middle part of Illinois across, but during the moves, we were moved to South Dakota several times, to Nebraska, where half of our tribe stayed and have a reservation, but now they're separate. So Wisconsin Winnebagos were existent, and then Nebraska Winnebagos, and at some point in history, we decided to call ourselves what we called ourselves originally, which is Ho-Chunk. And so the Ho-Chunks in Wisconsin are the ones that either came back from the moves or didn't ever leave.
Nice, thank you for that brief history. Lucy, I thought maybe we could bring you back in here when we're talking about all these roots and routes of food, roots, the history of food, and then the routes, all these routes, food travels. Maybe you could say a little bit about that within foodways scholarship. How do you think about the ways that food travels, and especially now in COVID times?
Well, how long do we have?
Probably getting towards concluding remarks here, but yeah, we can probably take a few more minutes here to hear a little bit about what you think about that.
Well, one of the things that really strikes me when Elena's talking about food, it's so different from the mainstream American approach to food, especially to comfort food, where it's all about the individual, and personal comfort and personal taste and personal health. And she's really talking about food in community. It's her personal memories, but it connects her to this larger community, to a whole culture, to a whole past. And when we think about comfort food, in the way it's used in food media and all, it is that very almost kind of trivial and demeaning, but very individualistic. So part of the idea of looking at foodways and all the different practices around food, we start seeing how we as individuals are actually connected to everyone else. So we're connected to the people who are stocking the supermarkets, because that's what enables us to then make that comfort food. We're connected to the workers in the chicken processing factories, because that's what we're eating. But usually we're not really aware of that. And so I think that's something that I'm really hoping the pandemic is making us see, that all these aspects of our lives that we just took for granted, that these are actually very, very important, and if we don't have them, then it messes up everything else. Everything is connected, everything's part of a system. but it's also showing us that we as individuals need connection to community, to these larger ideas, to seasons, to place and time. So I'm really hoping that the pandemic is creating these new awarenesses and new attitudes, and I'm pretty hopeful. I'm pretty optimistic. That people are finding so much comfort in seeing these connections. That they're going to try to continue that afterwards, and I think it could have a really massive effect, positive effect on the food system and on how we are all relating to food and each other.
Very true, and we're so glad that everyone's been able to join us tonight and extend these different connections that we have to each other through food and through learning. And when we think about sort of the concluding part of this program, of course, now I'm going to go make the soup and eat it. So there's a consumption aspect that's going to happen here. And then, of course, there's also the what to do with the leftovers, I don't want to say waste products. That sounds kind of negative, but someone asked, is there another use for the turkey bone after the meat is removed? And so I thought that was perhaps a good way to talk about what you do when you're done cooking and there's all this garbage, or what we might call garbage that maybe it doesn't have to be if we think a little bit more about these things.
So the turkey, like, we just discard, but I do keep all of my compost for the garden. I always set that aside, and then we save the seeds of the vegetables. I have this finished soup that I wanted to show you all, just so you can see how amazing it turned out here. Let me see. If you can see how delicious everything kind of gives you this wonderful bite. And all those vegetables, the carrots, the squash, the turkey, the wild rice, and the corn, really, I mean, they just naturally come together. And of course, you could add a bean to it if you wanted to put anything in there that you'd like. For me, this is comfort. This is my comfort food. And, our family here, but definitely you can make any changes. These flavors just naturally were meant to be shared together. In this way, so
beautiful. Yes.
Delicious.
Yes, so we're at 7 p.m. now, so I'll respect everyone's time by wrapping up here, but I thought maybe I'd just ask Elena and Lucy if you have any concluding remarks you want to make, or if anyone has any last questions, please do post those in the chat and we'll get those answered.
I just want to say thank you for having me and for letting me share a little bit of our food history with you all, and in a way, and how comforting food can really be. So hopefully, feel free to reach out. There's a lot of resources out there. Whatever food you find that relatability to, know that there's more to it, that comfort doesn't have to come from mindless eating, that you have those connections, and food is this amazing vessel that will transport you to memories, to experiences, to people, and to use that and have it nourish you, especially as we kind of enter this dark time of the year, that know that you're never alone, that these meals will support you and that they will, comfort you in ways that connect you to so much more. So just stay positive, stay safe, and thank you for joining me in my kitchen here and having me walk around with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Elena. And Lucy, do you have anything you'd like to add as we wrap up here?
I think Elena kind of said everything. So aside from me being hungry, but it's also really nice to see, the academic world, it's given me all these insights into just how to survive during the pandemic. And then I've gotten so many good ideas and so many insights, from reading, the chat and from Elena. And it really goes back to, to what scholarship is all about. It's supposed to help us understand life a little bit more and maybe come up with some, some solutions. So I really thank Elena, for, for doing what she's doing and kind of combining this academic talk with the hands-on. So I really enjoyed doing that.
Yes, and of course we have to thank the Wisconsin Humanities Council for funding this, and part of their mission as an organization is to bring artists and tradition bearers together with scholars for conversations like these. So we thank them for having that foresight and that scope so that we could have this wonderful discussion tonight. And now I think I will go make the soup and try to taste some of the beautiful sights that I was seeing on Elena's camera there. And yes, I will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone afterwards, hopefully with a recipe, Elena, if I could get a recipe from you. I was asked for that several times this evening. Also, I'll link everyone to the recording from this session if you'd like to watch it back. And of course, you can find more out about Lucy's work at tell me if I get this right, Lucy, www.foodandculture.org. Is that correct? Oh, you're muted there, Lucy. No, you're muted. There you go.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
So
foodandculture.org. Okay.
.org. And it's an ongoing exhibit. It's online. So so please click on that. There also are resources. There are articles about comfort food. There's the whole questionnaire that we used. And feel free to use that if you're teaching classes. It also works really well as just kind of dinner table conversation. Ask people what their comfort foods are. So
we'll have lots of opportunities for that with the holidays upon us here. And then, of course, you can find out more about Elena's work at www.WildBearies, and that's berries spelled BEARIES, as in bear, .org, and I'll link to that just now in the chat. So please do visit these websites and keep up with Lucy and Elena's work. It's so important. And we're so happy that you were able to join us this evening. Thank you all.